AWS, Apptio, and special guest Forrester. When you join today's webinar, you selected Join either by phone call or your computer audio. If for any reason you'd like to change your selection, you can do so by accessing the audio pane in your control panel. Also from this control panel, you will have the opportunity to submit questions to today's presenters. Simply type your questions into the questions pane. We will collect these and address them during the Q&A section at the end of the presentation. If we were not able to get to your question, we plan on responding to each of you personally through email. The recording of the webinar will be available 2 to 3 days after the conclusion of this presentation, so keep an eye out for that email. My name is Neeraj Zaveri. I specialize in cloud economics here at AWS, and I'll be your host and moderator for today's webinar. I'll be joined by Lauren Nelson, who's a VP and Research Director at Forrester, Gerard Green, who's a VP of Product Marketing at Apptio. Now, before we get started, I'd like to take a quick poll. What matters most to you and your company about cloud financial management? Please select one of the 3 options below. And we'll give everyone 30 seconds or so to put in their answers. Great. We just closed the poll, and it looks like about 2/3 of you said primary focus number 1 area is around cost optimization. That is actually 67% of folks. Another 19% said better measurement and accountability. And third said the planning and forecasting at 14%. We'll talk about these areas, but let's ask another question around this. So how many of you guys plan to take steps to optimize your cloud spend within the next 12 months? We'll give you guys about 30 seconds to answer the question. Great. We just closed the poll, and it looks like about 3/4 of you said definitely within the next 12 months you plan on taking action. Another 17% said probably, followed by 4% maybe and 3% no. So I think this will be a really relevant topic for the audience at hand today. So with that, I will hand it over to Lauren to get us started. Thank you.
Thanks, Neeraj. Next slide. Hi, everybody, and thank you for joining us today. I hope everyone had a good Memorial Day weekend. So as we get started into this, and I don't know if the slides are delayed a little bit, but next slide, please. There we go. Every industry today is using public cloud. So public cloud has been around since 2007. It's no stranger to the enterprise audience today. And we find that organizations across every single vertical incorporate into their key strategies. Everything from oil and gas to military to airlines to farming, pharmaceuticals, insurance, automotive, utilities companies that are historically very CapEx-centric are using public cloud today. Retail, public sector, sports teams have signed with major public cloud providers. Media and entertainment, food, leisure, weather, you name it, every single industry today has publicly talked about their use cases using a public cloud provider. Next slide. But when you look across these different industries at the data, some important things to get an idea about is well, what's total percentage, but also what are they using it for and how much of their environment is a public cloud platform today. So when we look at the numbers, a very conservative estimate is 64% of enterprises in North America and Europe are using public cloud today. We've seen estimates even much higher than this that estimate that over 80% are using public cloud today. When we asked them about what use cases, in the early days of cloud, you saw use cases of websites or a new mobile interface, very much this idea of variable usage and new use cases. But that has changed for most organizations. When you ask companies today about what, you get more diverse answers in terms of what is the total extent of workload that they deem suitable for a public cloud. If you look at a topic like cloud migration, that first came into popularity in 2015, where on the main stage for the first time, we heard stories of companies that were migrating existing workloads to the public cloud. Now, fast forward today, 86% of companies say that migration is part of their public cloud strategy. That is phenomenally high. That shows that a lot of organizations have moved past that initial use case or initial new testing and actually are considering public cloud as a platform that's suitable for existing applications they have. It has more suitability than just for this idea of variable workloads. And when we look at context of this in terms of total application portfolio, it is significant. So a very conservative estimate today is 12.1% of total infrastructure is in a public cloud environment today for any given enterprise on average. And some of the numbers you'll see in market today, especially those that have migration on their roadmaps, report estimates in the 30 to 40% range about their total percentage of infrastructure. Next slide. And when we look forward at where organizations are going, we see that these numbers are only increasing. So when we ask companies about the next 24 months, or next 12 months about whether they plan on implementing cloud, 78% of companies said that they would have implemented or plan on implementing. And when you look at total percentage of workload, you see that even conservative estimates show over a 2% increase year over year on percentage of workloads that will be in the public cloud and their total infrastructure in the cloud by the next 2 years. Next slide. And when you take a step back from this idea of organizations are heavily using cloud and starting to expand the total number of workloads, what's appropriate, and then the overall percentage of their environment, you start to face the first cloud management challenges. And when you talk to organizations about what is your number one cloud management challenge that you're trying to solve in the real time, you get cloud cost that comes up top of mind for everyone. There's no blog, there's no website that doesn't talk about the challenges of navigating cloud costs. So what does that mean? So next slide. When we talk about the complexity of cloud cost management, there's a lot that comes into that picture. So since 2007, when we look at the total options that are available to us, there's a much longer list than there was in 2007. There are more buying options for us to be able to use today, where we can be able to have shorter or longer elements of commit than we did previously. You know, we've got per second on-demand instances available. We have 3-year contracts. We have spot instances. We have reserved instances. We have savings plans. All of a sudden, it's a much more complicated buying market than we had previously. There's also different instance family types and instance sizes. We also see that there's a number of other fees that we need to be able to understand for our workloads, whether that's data out costs, understanding gateway fees, or some of the challenges on navigating a workload that spreads between an on-prem environment and a public cloud environment. We also see organizations trying to figure out, well, where is my waste? I have such a large percentage of my portfolio in public cloud today. There's all this excess stuff that I'm not necessarily capturing or identifying. So they're looking at things like IP addresses that are attached to terminated instances, or they're looking at storage resources that have not been diluted. They're looking at all of kind of this right sizing of their total environment, where they might be using the wrong instance for that particular workload. It may have been appropriate on-prem, but now that there's auto scaling available, that's no longer the best size that they should be looking at. So a whole bunch of concerns, and trying to figure out how to streamline this. In the early days of cloud, you saw some folks trying to do this through crafty spreadsheets that they had custom made. They were very proud of, but it became very difficult to actually scale to be able to do this definitively for the entire scope of cloud usage for their organization. Next slide. So when you talk to companies about solving for cost today, there's a few things that come up. So one of the questions they have is, what are the options I have for solving for cost? Besides my fancy spreadsheet, what could I use? And there's several different categories in which folks solve for cloud cost optimization today. There are capabilities in the native management platforms that allow you to optimize cost natively. There are standalone cloud cost monitoring and optimization tools that specialize in cost optimization. There's hybrid cloud management tools that have a cost optimization module as part of it. There's managed public cloud offerings. So if you're using a managed service provider to manage your cloud environment, many of them white label a cloud cost optimization tool as part of that service, whether they're providing these insights as part of that experience. In terms of not just the ways you could solve for this, but what should you expect when you're looking to try and solve for this today? A few things to know. So one, primarily the recommendations focus on improving infrastructure services. So if you're looking to get better recommendations on which app or developer service to use, note that a lot of the cost management capabilities today are about how to optimize your infrastructure services that you're using. There's a few that do database services, but primarily focus on that infrastructure service component. The 101 level, what most solutions do today is they identify waste. So they're able to find those unattached storage volumes, unattached IP addresses, orphan snapshots. They're able to try and be able to identify where you are spending, where it's not efficient for you. They also try and be able to provide some sort of optimization recommendation to right-size the instances that you have and the period in which you've committed to those resources. So they'll make recommendations about whether you should be using a reserved instance when you're using on demand. They'll recommend whether you should change the reserved instance you've committed to. And not only change it once the actual reservation period is over and when you have the chance to purchase new reserved instances, and how to optimize with those environments today based on what you've already purchased as well. You should also look at what they collect. Where do they get their data from? Most tools today, they get information directly from the billing information itself, as well as from monitoring tools, whether those are native monitoring tools or being able to get monitoring insights from third-party tools like an APM offering or an infrastructure monitoring capability. So being able to get an idea of health and an idea of how much you're spending and being able to provide insights based on those two. Next slide. Now, if you're going through all of this and you're thinking, wow, we don't really do anything to monitor our costs today, you are not alone. Today, only 55% of companies today actively monitor their cloud bill, and this is of cloud adopters. And when you ask them about whether they've taken steps to actively try and optimize their bill, only 51% have done that today. So if you haven't gotten to that yet, it's an easy way to try and make sure that you're getting the most out of your cloud bill. It's certainly something that is becoming one of the most common cloud management capabilities that are being built into the responsibility of a cloud management team, but you are not alone if you have not tackled this yet. Now, next slide. When you ask peers that have gone and started to tackle these challenges, there's some recommendations that they have. So when we've asked your peers kind of what are their pro tips for trying to solve for cost today, this is the advice that they have for you. So first, don't use a spreadsheet. Use the tools available. It is a waste of your time of FTE hours building and maintaining. And even those that have built wonderful spreadsheets have said, nope, we've retired those spreadsheets. We've gone to the tools because the maintenance of those tools, the short-term deals that are available, we just can't take advantage of it as quickly as those that are using the tool. They say continuously optimize. So this isn't just a one-time feature. Yes, you get a good optimization bonus when you turn the tool on for the first time and you're fixing some of the instances that are not configured correctly today. But then they see that as you're provisioning things over time, as your usage changes for different applications, you do continuously benefit from having optimization be an ongoing task in your organization. It is not one time. They say that get your reserved instances correct. And I've heard companies say it takes 6 months to get your reserved instances right. Others believe that cost optimization tools help them accelerate that process and be able to commit to reserved instances more quickly. But that can make a big difference on total spend. They say keep pricing simple. So although there's different ways you can choose to do cost optimization software licenses, they say stick with it simply. They said they've tried to over-architect some of the building. It ends up being confusing for their developers. And that for them, it's really easy to communicate to developers that the amount they spend on the tool equals the percentage of cloud spend they have. Or a very simplistic model is very easy to communicate to developers, where more challenging ones tend to weigh down and make it harder to communicate with their internal stakeholders. They say leverage data to facilitate business combos. So a lot of folks say, this tool lets me start a combo with someone on the dev team. I haven't previously been able to communicate with the dev team and have them take my advice on how they should be managing their cloud instances or reducing their fees. These charge fees dashboards give me a conversation starter. They say test and enable auto remediation. So a lot of folks are uncomfortable with auto remediation at first. As companies experience more scale and get more comfortable with the tools, they're actually enabling this auto remediation over time, especially for certain environments. So they might enable it for their test dev environment, but then not do it yet for their production environment. So look to those tools. Strive for proactive improvements as well. So today, a lot of cost optimization is reactive. You've provisioned resources, you're looking where you can cut costs, and then you're cutting costs. Look to see where you can be more proactive, where you can improve the optimization of environment at time of provisioning, whether that's providing in-portal advice to a user about what to provision or what the right instance is, or to help your users have best practices to follow when they're going through that provisioning process, or build within their development tools to provide these same type of recommendations. And then finally, they say ensure that complexity adds any real value. So anytime in a cloud strategy, regardless of whether it's focused on cost, anytime you're adding complexity to environment, make sure that there's a payout to it. As technical individuals, we tend to over-architect things, we tend to overthink things and try and think of every situation, and it ends up making things overly complex and ends up not equaling the benefit that it provided. So really think heavily when you're adding complexity into these environments. And finally, next slide, when organizations start to think about how to engage in cost optimization tools, we provide a guide. So Forrester actually wrote a report that's top 10 facts you should know about cost optimization that goes through everything from what tools you can use, what to expect in terms of pricing, how they price it, ROI expectations. Spoiler alert, ROI does come quickly, and we do not say that for most tools. It's hard-pressed to find that in many reports, but it really does pay out very quickly for cost optimization capabilities. And you'll find other information about here in terms of what plays in this space, as well as how to switch from more of a reactive optimization model to more of a proactive model. So with that, thank you, everybody. I want to pass things over to Niraj, who's going to talk about AWS capabilities specifically.
Great. Thank you so much, Lauren. So today what we'll talk about on the AWS side is first what we tend to see around cloud spend, and we'll talk a little bit about the origin of that, and we'll dive a little deeper into what the discipline of cloud financial management is and how associated activities can be used to improve the actual unit economics of using AWS and drive positive business outcomes. Next slide, please. Thank you. So the slide you're looking at here really highlights the traditional process for budgeting, requesting, approving, procuring, and installing physical infrastructure. And it's one that, frankly, has been learned over many decades of running infrastructure. What we typically see is that you have an engineering or an IT team that's typically requesting some sort of hardware resource, compute. And so then you have a finance team who's involved acting as essentially an approver to understand how it fits in, as well as a procurement sort of a function. And then you have an operations team, which is installing the infrastructure, making sure that it's got the gold standard and ready to be utilized by the original requester. This process increases the cost of failure for organizations due to the long-term nature of these investments. If you think about approvals, procurement cycles, and general operationalization activities, these all slow down the ability to experiment and innovate for our technology teams, ultimately increasing the total cycle time it takes to get the resources that you actually need. It really is a model which increases business risk and reduces agility. It's fundamentally a problem that we see that can be solved on AWS. Next slide, please. What you see on AWS is, with this chart here, is around cloud technology consumption. What we see is that technology teams are able to innovate faster due to the decreased approval, procurement, and infrastructure deployment cycles. We also see that cost of failure is eliminated or greatly reduced for our finance organizations, since they're usually just a few clicks or API calls away from terminating cloud resources where needed. We see that technology teams, though, are no longer just builders, but they're operators and owners of their products. They're responsible for most of the activities associated typically with finance and operations teams, including the procurement and deployment of resources. This is a pretty big transformation for organizations used to working in that old model that we just discussed. As such, we really need to think about the best way customers can undergo this transformation successfully. How do we make this transformation? And that really is where our cloud economics, cloud financial management practice comes in at AWS. We're here to really help you understand how these processes should be redesigned in this new world. Next slide, please. So when you're thinking about how to address excess cloud spend, it's really natural to think about the reasons and root causes at play around cost optimization. Walking through this from the top left to the bottom right. First is that AWS offers on-demand provisioning capabilities that make it easy for pretty much anyone to spin up resources. Second is that we offer over 200 services, each with different resource types and different pricing models, from on-demand, reserved, and spot, as well as savings plan. This flexibility is really powerful, but we have to learn how to navigate it. We also see that if infrastructure is over-provisioned, it often does not get resized when it's moved to AWS. For example, for customers that have migrated to AWS, if they bring on over-provisioned on-premise infrastructure with them, they have to monitor their workloads and look for opportunities to resize to the right instances to meet their needs. What we also see is that forecasting costs can be more complex given the elastic usage patterns that are associated with dynamic workloads. And pricing models need to be thought through to optimize this. And then when we see that when resources are provisioned, their owners really need to establish visibility into what their applications are costing in the cloud. Technology organizations need better visibility and accountability into these costs. Next slide, please. So if we group the set of activities that are needed into categories, what we see is it falls across four main buckets. First is the ability to see, and that's see your cloud spend and usage, what we call measurement and accountability. Second is to be able to save, to take action, and that really is saving on your existing cloud spend, which is cost optimization. Third, we see that as customers start to project out their cloud investments, it really comes to planning and looking at future spend and usage, what we categorize in planning and forecasting. And final bucket here is around run, and that is running an infrastructure which is cost efficient across different workloads, what we call cloud financial operations. Next slide, please. And what we'll do here is we'll walk through each of those categories in a little bit of depth. So first, what you'll see is the measurement and accountability category, or C, as we previously called it. When we review the activities in each of these, I'll draw a direct relationship to an activity and a business outcome. For example, within measurement accountability, we focus on creating an appropriate level of granularity here. The idea is to understand what cost and usage is and have visibility to it. And a typical activity here is that it's around helping to create a cost and account structure for the resources that are being deployed on AWS. Obviously, a pretty important activity. The benefit of this is that by doing so, what we see is that our customers are able to create a natural relationship between AWS and their spend. The workloads that are using them, the environments, and they can then go to the engineering teams that Lauren had spoken to previously. They can go to the line of business leads and provide detailed accountability around the actual spend that is being incurred. Next slide, please. And here we'll talk about cost optimization. And again, cost optimization focuses on reducing the cost of your AWS footprint through technical and commercial optimization. An example here of cost optimization is implementing processes to identify resource waste. This can include right-sizing to meet your capacity needs. It can include terminating underutilized or idle resources. The outcome of this is that what we see is our customers are able to recoup the savings from over-provisioned or unused resources. They can then take that money and reinvest it back into experimentation. Next slide, please. Oh, thank you. So here we have the planning and forecasting pillar. Planning and forecasting focuses on setting expectations, improving business and financial predictability, as well as using AWS as an enabling agent for strategic long-term business transformation. A sample activity here includes establishing a process for cloud budgeting and forecasting, utilizing business drivers and unit costs. What we see here is that customers who do this are able to dive deeper into true drivers of cost, including when the associated costs will hit the books, thereby improving predictability, both in short and long-term cloud consumption. And next slide, please. And here we have the pillar around cloud financial operations. This really focuses on operational, people, and technology enablers of continuous cloud financial management that scales as our customers' journey on the cloud matures. An example activity here includes investing in people through education, in governance through process, and tools, which is automation or third-party providers as you scale. What we see here is that customers who invest in this area are able to push their cloud financial knowledge management to individual builders who they themselves become more cost-conscious and focused. They build mechanisms into their applications that minimize cost-related technical debt as they scale in AWS through consistent and repeatable guardrails. Next slide, please. And here we'll put it all together. What we see here is that we've defined a formal, disciplined approach at managing, optimizing, predicting AWS costs in a continuous manner. Thank you. And I believe next I'll hand it to Gerard at Apptio.
All right. Thank you, Neeraj. Appreciate it. Hi, everybody. My name is Gerard Green, Vice President of Product Marketing at Apptio. I'm really excited to talk to you about delivering cloud financial management at scale. Next slide. Fundamentally, at Apptio Cloudability, we help organizations improve visibility into where their cloud workloads reside across the business and across the organization, and then work to empower those teams and individuals to reconcile those workloads to ensure the best leverage of available discounts. We solve for the problems associated with imperfect tagging, sharing costs, understanding complicated business structures, so that the consumers of cloud services can get the granular views and insights to control cost and govern spend. Our goal is to accelerate the cycle you see in front of you. And again, it's really done to make sure that you can be informed, optimize costs, plan around predictable levels of spending, and then operate to achieve the ongoing savings as opposed to one and done approaches. I'm going to break down this wheel so you can understand each component. So let's go to the first slide, or the next slide, which starts with the informed stage. Improving cloud financial management starts with being informed. You simply can't manage what you can't see. And organizations, as Laura mentioned earlier, can drive huge wins quickly by having just accurate and timely cloud spend data to inventory those workloads, make sure that they're normalized for adjusted discounts, credits, and amortization. And from there, can easily allocate those costs back to consumers to derive a trusted and defensible chargeback process. One of the advantages of Apptio Cloudability is the ability to integrate custom pricing and discounts immediately, not 10 or 14 days after months close, so that organizations can get their true cost to drive decisions. This doesn't just only provide a comprehensive understanding of spend, it drives accountability through the building of trust, empowering your stakeholders to have accurate, actionable information that matches their understanding of cloud spend to their team and their roles. There's also the ability to benchmark cost across the organization to help see where organizations are driving optimal cloud financial management and where other organizations are struggling. Let's go to the next slide. And this is a breakdown of again, how we drive this. Again, the ability to establish that cost allocation strategy to make sure costs are going to the right place, integrate that custom pricing and discounting, provide a defensible showback and chargeback process, and then establish benchmarking along the way. If you go to the next slide, I'm going to tell you how this paid dividends to one of our retail customers, a supermarket chain using multiple cloud providers. They simply just weren't getting the granularity they needed from the cloud bills and the supporting spreadsheet processes. And again, when we started the call, the poll said 20% of you wanted to make sure you drove accountability here. The organization had challenges leveraging savings plans and it's really struggled to allocate costs back to their consumers. They specifically chose Cloudability for the metrics around flexible reporting, the dashboards and views, which allowed them to eliminate waste quickly and improve cost certainty. Within the first 90 days, they saved over $500,000 and went from 0 reserved instance coverage to about 80%. They can now pass those costs directly to those teams who are fully accountable for their budgets. And through this period of uncertainty, they can quickly associate and optimize their level of cloud spend associated with their call center costs, which obviously have increased through this period to support their customers, but allowing them to adjust their plans accordingly, whether that's the ability to ramp up or to ramp down in the right size. Let's go on to the next slide where we get into levels of the optimization stage. So optimization simply is about only paying for the resources you need so that you can free up the capital to drive the business forward. Again, when Naresh drove the poll in the beginning, about 2/3 of you said that optimization is what matters most. That's probably why you're listening to this webinar. So as mentioned in the previous story, one of the ways you optimize is just to detect the anomalies. And that's a huge win for some of our customers. That identification of waste, what's been left on, what can be turned off, can account for a huge dividend. And again, when we think about cloud waste all up, Laura mentioned that this can be as high as 30–35% for most organizations with their cloud bill annually. And these quick savings are often enough to fund and justify the purchase. This is where that quick ROI Laura mentioned comes into play. Let's go to the next slide. So again, once these workloads are inventoried and reconciled, we're able to help you centralize your commitment in the buying process and then provide you recommendations for both reserved instances and savings plans through a unified experience that allows your consumers to make informed trade-off decisions and empower them to take action on those recommendations, understanding the long-term implications. The ability to right-size workloads is done through Apptio's Cloudability's ability to leverage trillions of hours of usage data, algorithms, and machine learning to continuously generate a ranked list of recommendations with explicit scores for both savings and risk, so you can run your cloud infrastructure with maximum efficiency. And then lastly, to take the guesswork out of migrating new workloads to clouds, organizations can specify a workload by entering their specific compute requirements, and Apptio Cloudability can identify candidate instances with sufficient disk, memory, and CPU capacity. This approach ensures that you're using the optimal instances for the workload across cloud providers and checks unused reserve instances to make sure you're paying the optimal price for a given workload. Let's go to the next slide, and I can tell you how one of our travel agency customers who's currently experienced a significant drop in business due to worldwide travel restrictions is getting the granularity and the visibility they need to cut costs fast. As you can imagine, every organization on the planet has been asked to identify where they can optimize costs. IT spend's not immune to that challenge. And when you think about the executive team's ability to say, where can we make cuts, and IT leaders being tasked to replan and forecast their budgets within a matter of days, that decrease in demand meant that cloud expenditure may not have been necessary to levels it was once prior. And so again, the ability for the leadership team to determine which services and which resources were mission critical allowed them to frame a narrative that said, where can we downsize and where can we get to a place where when demand returns to its normal state, we can operate efficiently. So again, by taking full advantage of Cloudability's optimization features, the organization was quickly able to save the money, identify over-provisioned resources to right size, and then using the reports and dashboards generated, the teams were able to communicate exactly which cloud services were tied to those mission-critical functions, which could be cut or optimized. Next slide. So let's get into planning. And again, this is an element of being able to understand that based on prior usage, what is an optimal path forward to ensure the outcomes we need. So how do we not over-provision? How do we not spend more than we say we would? And how do we get to a place where we improve our level of predictability as we take this cloud journey? And organizations face a lot of challenges with budgeting and forecast and spend. And as Laura mentioned, the cloud complexity is just driving this, right? So when the resources that make up cloud infrastructure are continuously changing, the applications need more instances than you initially planned. When unused instances are left running, it's no wonder organizations see considerable spend to plan variance. Let's go to the next slide. And I want you just with me to just imagine a world where you can actually track spend in real time, understanding time periods, understanding consumption, and understanding accountability in a single view, so that you can predict where your spend is headed and then do something about it before it's too late. And this is the world that Apptio Cloudability customers live in. Their ability really to set and define accounts and services that map to organizational and financial reporting structures through our views feature allows projects or team level budgets to be seen and allocated in a single view. This allows them to review budgets and cloud providers through a single pane of glass. Again, the centralization of where the workloads are and our ability to make informed decisions about right sizing and optimizing those workloads. They can now track how they're trending and ensure that they stay within their budgets and use month-to-date analysis for an accurate view of the current month against the previous month's trends. And again, this allows them to quickly identify their biggest spend drivers and the variables associated with them. It's also important for them to be able to set notifications and alerts at intervals of their choosing, so they can be informed of when they're on or off track to exceed the budget. Improving cost certainty is one of the biggest benefits our customers ascertain. And again, if they can reduce their budget variance by as much as 75%, with some organizations spending within 5% of their plan month over month, which again is part of the predictability most of you raised your hand for when asked what was your biggest driver for cloud financial management. I'll go to the next slide and show you how one of our customers, SaaS video infrastructure encoding company, was able to do this. They simultaneously leveraged all of the major cloud providers and needed to address executive concerns about the increasing levels of cloud spend and the spend to plan variance that they were running into month over month. They were really in search of a better way to monitor and control those costs, and identified and selected Apptio Cloudability. They started simply just shutting things off, right? The dev and test instances to realize initial savings, going back to that quick ROI we talked about, and then followed up with the right size and recommendations and following the right commitment strategy in that optimized bucket. But really where they're getting the most bang for their buck is using our business metrics feature, which allows them to map cloud costs against a business metric like customer growth to see how cloud costs impact their cost per customer goals. This allows them to make better decisions today about future outcome. So again, being able to tag cloud costs to a specific customer creates a common ground for finance and engineers who can sit down and make better decisions as they increase their tagging coverage, and then hone in on what the teams are actually spending, and then use that data to fuel better forecasting. It's an amazing story of what happens when everyone can operate on the same page. And again, using historical data to plan a better future is really what accurate forecasting and budgeting is about. And then last but not least, if you go to the next slide for me, we'll talk about operations. So again, in that last kind of Amazon phase, they talked about operate. We talk about it as well. We strongly recommend that cloud cost optimization isn't a one and done thing. Once you improve your ability to see and then optimize and plan, you can now institute a series of processes that allow you to achieve ongoing savings of 15% or more. And this is where the practices of cloud financial management get established and ultimately automated to drive more value for your organization. Next slide. So again, the value of this really rests in your ability to get the data to the cloud consumers that need it in the context that they need it in. Having IT finance on board with this, the business all on the same page with spend and usage insights. And for over a decade, Apptio, as a brand, as a company, has helped IT leaders develop this Rosetta Stone by shifting the dialogue from bytes, bits, feeds, and speeds into things like time and money and dollars, the things that the business understands and obviously fundamentally cares about. So this practice of technology business management is deployed within thousands of organizations worldwide and has been used by CIOs to help teams communicate the cost, quality, and value of IT to their business partners so they can drive more innovation within their organization. Apptio Cloudability is no different in this regard, right? And this is done through the business mappings I talked about, right? Empowering organizations to automatically overlay a business structure on top of cloud spend that connects IT, finance, and line of business teams is really critical. So this business mappings is a rule-based engine that categorizes cloud spend to the specific taxonomy of the business, enabling organizations to optimize the unit economics of a given application, service, or business unit. So this enables full integration of IT operations tools and system-generated ERP and CMDB cost center codes that are understood by humans, and reports and dashboards then become more meaningful and more impactful. So with these mappings, the finance, procurement teams simply don't need to understand EC2 and EBS and S3. They can work with cloud spend in terms of applications, products, services, business units, anything that the business derives value from, and then develop the cloud cost KPIs that matter most to them so they can drive optimal cloud financial management. This is best told through the story of one of our streaming media companies in the next slide, who, as you can imagine, right, with all of the change in the last couple of months, have hit all-time highs in terms of streaming. And they've experienced enormous increases in demand for their video streaming services. They leverage the scalability and the elasticity of cloud to meet that demand, but ultimately need to understand how this impacts their unit costs and ultimately their bottom line. And that sudden increase in demand had a knock-on effect of cloud costs to support those streams. So with pressure to cut costs amidst this challenge we're all in, IT quickly needs to determine, are they experiencing rising cloud costs per stream, or if the increased cloud costs were simply a result of increased demand. And leveraging this business mapping feature, the company was able to calculate their average cost per stream over time, right? Multiple dimensions. By comparison, historical averages to the current cost per stream, they're now able to show that their unit costs have remained flat. So again, the rising costs were a result of demand and their COGS weren't affected. And this is one of many examples of business metrics in action that we would love to have a richer conversation with you about. So we go to the final slide. I just hope, again, you found this very brief overview of the depth of Apptio Cloudability very informative, and we're happy to answer any questions you or your teams may have. So with that, I will pass back to Naresh. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gerard. So we've had a few questions come in through the question stream here. So Lauren, it looks like the first one's probably best answered by you, and someone here is asking, what's the greatest pitfall that you see for a company that fails to implement an effective cloud strategy?
Yeah, so typically when companies struggle at implementing an effective cloud strategy, and we're not just talking cost optimization here, we're talking broader cloud strategy. And typically where organizations struggle is they go too far, they go too complex. So they've got this plan on paper, and they're deciding they're going to do every single possible part of a cloud strategy that they could, and they want to tackle all of them at once and have this complete plan that launches. Whereas a lot of effective cloud strategies today launch on a specific effort that's urgent or particularly critical, and then they look to build out from there. When they're looking at tools, when they're looking at how the strategy will expand, they certainly look at where they want to go and trying to see, does this fit into that future plan? Are they planning ahead for what they will do? But they're doing the initial push, the initial plan based on a smaller, more doable project. So if you're just getting started, I'd say that's one big piece from your peers. You'll also find that a lot of your peers constantly revisit their cloud strategy. Some companies claim they revisit their cloud strategy every 3 months. Other companies say that they revisit them every 6 months, where they're looking at early efforts, early ideas as this adaptive model where, you know, a decision early on may not necessarily mean a wrong decision or something they did badly, but rather the best decision they had at the time. That decision has since evolved, and they've had an adaptive, flexible model that allows them to switch course, to be able to be to adjust and figure out what that strategy will look like moving forward. So a lot of organizations, when they're thinking about strategy, if they're too hard-lined, they're thinking about the next 5 years, they revisit too infrequently, are all characteristics of those that really struggle in thinking. Whereas those that are more flexible, they start with small success, they don't get overly complex, tend to find much more success.
Great, thank you so much, Lauren. Gerard, here's a question about what differentiates Apptio from your competitors.
Yeah, you know, in addition to some of the compelling features we spoke to, namely the multi-cloud cost optimization, the business mapping and metrics features, one of the things that makes Apptio different is that we remain independent, best of breed IT financial management platform that helps you ingest and structure data from over 350 source systems, including cloud service providers, right? And we are able to structure that data into an industry standard classification and taxonomy, our Apptio Technology Business Management Unified Model. So again, CIOs, their teams, IT finance, engineers, developers can all understand the value of IT. And as more organizations migrate to cloud services, we believe it's just critically important for them to understand ideal migration candidates, so which applications and services make the most sense for cloud, being able to compare on-premise modernization options and options from public cloud services. And then once they get to cloud, operate and govern and manage those workloads efficiently. And we believe Apptio is the only vendor rooted in the center of all three of those steps. So if asked what makes Apptio Cloudability different, I'd say it's those three elements.
Great. Oh, and there's a question here about how cloud financial management has evolved over the past few years. And really, you know, it's from an AWS perspective, when we started working with customers, it really started around cost optimization, which we've seen today is certainly a very major theme here. But it was really around, well, where should I be using reserved instances? Well, you know, what instance size should I be utilizing? How do I actually monitor how much of my resources is being consumed? And we continue to help answer these sort of fundamental questions, but we also hit this conclusion that you probably have heard here from Lauren, myself, and Gerard, where we see this as a continual living, breathing process, that infrastructure itself is living and breathing and dynamic, and that the operations around it should be as well. And so what we tend to see is that we started answering the specific question of when do I use an RI? That's sort of a tactical approach. But as we started to help organizations more and more and went deeper into it, we saw there was a lot more of a need for understanding how do I govern this, which is the operation side of things, which is that continual theme you're hearing. What tools can I use to help me with this? And we also hear themes around, well, help me project. As cloud becomes more and more important to my organization, I, from a finance perspective, need to do a better job of planning and forecasting around this as well. And so these are all themes that we've seen as that customers adopt more of the cloud. their processes need to adopt and change, and we're here to help with that. Oh, there's another question here for you, Lauren. It looks like someone's asking about, with more people than ever working from home, where does the future of cloud fit in?
Yeah, our remote work research has been very popular in the last few months, as folks can imagine. As more organizations get comfortable working from home, cloud becomes more common, especially amongst your software as a service providers that have SaaS versions of their products, like video conferencing, especially, that have experienced increased workloads. So a lot of organizations are experiencing increased cloud usage to support that remote workforce. They're finding that, especially those that have global workforces that are using collaboration software that had not previously been hosted in the cloud, they're finding difficulty in supporting those remote workers without affecting productivity. So we are seeing an increased focus on using SaaS-based collaboration technologies that are cloud-based, where organizations are trying to figure out how do I work in this new normal. So that's a big trend is we are seeing increased usage. A lot of software solutions are providing free or discounted versions of their SaaS-based technologies today too. So you're finding that previously workloads that may have been hybrid, you may find that more of those workloads are consolidated on a single cloud provider or multiple cloud providers. And so you're trying to, as a cloud manager, navigate any new latency you might be experiencing, any reduced latency, and trying to monitor this new cost normal as well as your new health normal for the new allotment of hybrid resources you have. So it's going to depend for each single organization, but there is a push for those managing these environments to figure out how this has affected their organization in terms of those stats. So that's what we're mostly hearing about. There's also a lot of research we have on this around what this means for SIs and GSIs that are supporting remote workforces, around how this is changing contracts experienced in terms of remote workforce, as well as new interest in security tools. You know, best practices around, are you changing your Wi-Fi password? Are you providing the right at-home security tools for your remote workers? So a lot of different topics that we're hearing with this.
Thank you, Lauren. Let's see, Gerard, it looks like here's another one for you. It's around, when should an organization start considering using a third-party tool?
Yeah. I think, Lauren mentioned it in her section. I think is worth doubling down on here. I think when the cloud complexity starts to warrant it, when you start to see multi-cloud, when spend starts to increase significantly, when you start driving cost overruns and challenges associated with allocation and tagging and governance, it probably becomes time to look at a tool that allows you to get some scale here. What we hear from most of our customers is that native tools made a lot of sense when they began the journey. So when their requirements were simple, it made sense. But as they've kind of gone to multiple cloud environments and the complexities increased dramatically, the ability to normalize those costs has surfaced. Native tools sort of don't fit their bill to be able to check the box in that regard. So for allocation, for shared costs, for tagging, these things really floated to the top of the requirement list. So I'd say if you're an organization that assumes your cloud spend will only increase year over year, and they don't have to put a number on it, but if your cloud spend set to increase anywhere between 10 and 15%, as well as the number of providers you use, third-party tools start to make a ton of sense to help you manage for the complexity that you'll ultimately run into. So I'd give that advice to the person that asked that question.
Great. And here's another one for you, Gerard. It's someone's just asking in general, how does Cloudability, Apptio Cloudability work? Is it agent? Is it SaaS-based? How does it work?
It's a SaaS-based tool that injects cloud billing data directly from the provider, so no agents required. Great.
And someone else here is asking about, just summarizing here, essentially, how do I get started? And typically, it's defining what the scope of that is. And so that's working with an account manager and saying, okay, what workloads do we believe make the most sense for the cloud? And then working with your account manager, potentially your solutions architect, to define what it would look like on AWS.
Awesome.
I think that hits the bulk of the questions we've got here. There's definitely some more that we can follow up offline, but I think these are the broad brush strokes of questions we've received today. Great. So thank you, everyone, for your time today. What you'll see here is just a few links as far as next steps. So first off, there is a free trial of Cloudability. You'll see the link here on your page. In addition, of course, there's also the ability to try AWS itself for free with the link below. Again, this session is being recorded and it will be available in about 2 to 3 business days. Thank you all for your time today.